City biking is somewhat controversial, and it shouldn't be. There are a number of alternatives to it, and there have been some successes and failures, and I'd like to discuss some of these and give you a little more of an insight as to what we're going to look like in the future. Thanks for watching this so far. I'm going to cover some controversial subjects that might make you excited or upset. And I'm sorry for the upset side, but please listen carefully because you may learn something. I know I did when I put this together.
Biking in the city. It is likely that you have heard by now that Americans are increasing the number of bicycles they ride. There is an increase in the number of bicycles on the road. Statistics from the bike industry show that sales in May were up by 81% in May. The number of $1 billion that were sold in a topic for a second consecutive month is impressive. I have been scrambling to find bicycles, resulting in major shorts as a result. At the time of the pandemic, some cities closed their streets so that bikers and pedestrians would have more room to maintain a social distance during the spring and summer of 2020. Bike shops found it difficult to meet the demand of new cyclists. Since then, retailers have been able to get their inventory as soon as possible. There are more bikes, motorcycles, mopeds, and scooters on the road today than ever before. Transportation experts say the moment is right for a transit upheaval in the near future. This is what's called micromobility, and it's all coming together at the same time. Here are some ways in which the U.S. transportation system might be affected by the presence of more bikes on the road. Let's examine them. As a result of the pandemic, two groups of people have taken up biking: those who do it to commute to work, those who take it to work, and those who use it for other purposes. Additionally, it can be used for health and fitness purposes, as well as for recreational purposes.
I fell into the first bucket, which is signed up for a city bike membership in New York City. In September, losing the bike for me right now is basically just the process of getting myself from one place to another. There were many reasons why I did not bike before the pandemic. Just because biking, our city was so scary and cars are just all over the place that I avoided biking at all costs. However, the reason why I changed it was because there is a smaller number of entries. I feel much safer on a bike than a car, for one thing.
And Emily represents the growing number of women in an activity that has traditionally been dominated by men in New York. And women, obviously, are now the most active users of the city's bike share program since it was launched in 2013. In addition to personal safety, there is a gender difference, which is that fear and concerns about traffic safety in addition to personal safety, but primarily traffic safety. So in an environment such as this where there is less motor vehicle traffic, there is certainly a possibility that women will be able to take advantage of this. That's right. We know Vic Wright, who lives in North Carolina. For the last time during the pandemic, he rode his bicycle, but he now cycles 7 or 8 times a week, regardless of whether the gym is closed due to the pandemic.
As I was playing basketball, I didn't get as much cardio as I wanted, so I bought weights to increase my cardio way to exercise. I might just race for one season and not fall off, but I think cycling just for funding, just for exercise and something like.
It is true that he scored a road bike by looking on Facebook Marketplace, and not everyone has been as lucky early on in the pandemic basic level. Adult bicycles under $200 led bike sales, with more than 200 soaring more than 3% from the year prior. Sales of mountain bikes grew by more than 150% in that time span, increased by 107% over the previous year. Then in June 2020, the amount will increase by another 107%, since the demand has shifted to higher and bicycles worth more than $1,000, such as mountain bikes and electric bikes, before the pandemic occurred. A high-end electric bike company tripled its production in anticipation for growth. Still, it wasn't enough to meet demand for the company. For comparison, that's much higher than the production at the moment. In Q2 2021, we may be able to start growing even more. There are 6 times as many requests as we had last year. During this project, we had to do the hardest work we had ever done in our lives, and we did the most difficult work that we had ever done. There was not much we could do but try the best we could. As far as our specialized expertise is concerned, it has been in existence for almost 50 years now. It's not like the bikes don't exist. so it's not like they aren't there. The type of bike you ride makes a difference. It is true that the bicycle infrastructure in the United States lags behind that of many European nations and countries where cycling is already a part of their transportation systems. The major reason for the gap is the automobile industry of the United States. The automobile is by far the most prevalent form of transportation in the United States today. Considering the magnitude of the issue, it is one that is of a great deal of importance, and that will eat up a large amount of federal funding and government policy for a period of about 90 to 91 months. The majority of the federal funding went to the construction, the pilot project, which was majority funded by the federal government. In addition, the public transportation system was also predominantly funded by the federal government. This will be the first time since 1991 that some other money is being allocated to improving active means of transportation for bicycle and bicycling. We have witnessed the increase in funding since then. It has some impact. Building any infrastructure that he stays on for a particular period. There were already plans in place in some cities to expand their biking network ahead of the pandemic. When they saw an increase in cycling, they acted quickly. That was the case in Seattle. As a result, it was one of the first municipalities to make 20 miles of its Stay Healthy Streets program permanent. A program meant to allow residents outside while maintaining a social media presence. They decided early in the pandemic to repurpose some neighborhood streets, their neighborhood greenways, as we call them, to be local access only, to make them closed for cars, through and open for people walking and people bike. And this allowed people to socially distance themselves and also hear. Now, as we emerge from the pandemic, we're working with communities to determine what that means in terms of making those permanent. As a result of temporary cycling infrastructure, some U.S. cities have seen a gradual increase in rides on shared bicycles and scooters. Other cities, including London, Milan, and Geneva, added flexible bike lanes to separate bikers and cars. Having said that, one of the things that we are starting to see in data is that the trips are actually getting longer. This is something I think is a really interesting finding. People are taking longer trips with shared micromobility in post-pandemic times. The growth of infrastructure to support it may also be closely aligned with the growth in the number of slow streets. For instance, as far as the biking infrastructure in the United States is concerned, there are many options: protected bike lanes, bicycle boulevards, bike paths and trails off the road, home streets, and traditional bike lanes that are striped. All of those things, along with traditional traffic signal tools. We have all of those tools available to us. It's just a matter of combining them in the right context and the right environment. I would argue that what we see that we just aren't always willing to do it in March 2022 because we don't always have the political will to make these improvements before we know how to make these types of improvements. At Portland State University's Transportation Research and Education Center, researchers looked at 6 cities and compared the employment numbers and sales wages of retail and food services before and after the addition of bicycle infrastructure in those cities. The study was based on a 2013 report by the New York City Department of Transportation and a report by the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. Our experience has shown us that, in many places, new bike lanes and pedestrian infrastructure in business areas have often been associated with an increase in sales and employment to businesses situated along the corridors. In some cases, there may not be a choice. Funding for cycling infrastructure creates a big challenge for bicycling infrastructure, but we have seldom seen a negative effect. Typically, the money for bicycle infrastructure is derived from federal and state gas taxes. In the end, the money ends up being used to build roads for automobiles. Some critics say the money should be used for improving the infrastructure for motor vehicles since it comes from gas taxes. The money will be raised. The next step is to decide where to spend it. Historically, when looking across class and racial lines, the infrastructure that is placed has often been a barrier. I would like to point out that these are new. Bicycle infrastructure is not usually distributed equitably across cities. There are some good studies that show that at least in larger cities, white, higher income, and more affluent people are likely going to have access to better bicycle infrastructure as compared to others. There is no doubt that this needs to change. In order to be more equitable in providing accessible, safe infrastructure for everyone, we need to do a better job at being more equitable, even though the pandemic has caused a rise in numbers of Americans biking. However, it hasn't been confirmed. Once the flu is gone, biking will continue to be popular whenever the United States opens to the public again after the COVID lockdown. There was a period of time during the summer when transportation planners carefully watched a metric called vehicle miles traveled. The travel metric measures the amount of travel by all vehicles within a given area over a given period of time, which fell on March 2020. The number of vehicles on the road increased when cities reopened following COVID lockdowns, which may indicate that people were taking longer rides in their cars and possibly returning to congested roads. There has been a slow recovery in terms of the level of car traffic to pre-pandemic levels. I believe that bicycling will continue as a permanent transportation option in cities where they have already prioritized shared mobility and pedestrian pathways. There is a silver lining to all this, however, and that is the increased appetite for cycling, scooters, and walking that we are seeing. One of the things we are predicting is the fact that we are going to see more infrastructure dedicated in the coming years. We want to ensure that walking, cycling, and scootering are all safe moving forward, and that people will be able to take advantage of active transportation as a result. Therefore, when we look at how we make these infrastructure investments, a lot of them are based on the conditions of the streets themselves, and where we can, or where we need to restore or rebuild streets that are paving them. And when we do that, what we can do in terms of making those streets better. We need to support multimodal travel during our recovery from the pandemic so that people can get moving again. There will need to be a number of travel options available to people. That way, we don't get back to congestion and frustration with our transportation system. Our goal is to ensure that people can get around the city safely no matter how they used to do so.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and give me a thumbs up. I'd also appreciate it if you hit the bell so that you'd be notified the next time I come out with another video. I truly appreciate you watching. This has been Gary's Resolve.